Our next event is our guest keynote speaker. It's Jeffrey Munn, who has written a wonderful book called Staying Sober Without God. And if you buy a copy of the book, Jeff would be happy to sign it for you after the event. So without further ado, let's welcome Jeffrey up to the podium.
Hello, everybody. Cool. First of all, so excited to be here. Such a pleasure, such a privilege to be here. Thank you, Beth, for inviting me out. It's really exciting. I want to give a brief disclaimer. I do not consider myself an authority on addiction. I don't consider myself an expert on anything other than my experience and my recovery. This book that I wrote is something that I had... Thank you for your purchase. All proceeds go directly to my student loans. So, this book is the book that I kind of wish had been available for me back in the day, back when I first started in AA. Actually, I first started in MA, Marijuana Anonymous, and it does exist, and it's a good thing because I'm not sure if I had gone to traditional AA, which was much more deistic and theistic, I don't know if I would have stuck around for very long. MA, they're all very, very chill. And so they're like, you believe in God? No? Okay. Have a seat. So it wasn't a big deal. And there was a lot more openness there. So, and I stuck around, and it saved my life. As a lot of people have said, the traditional 12-step program saved my life. I met a lot of fantastic people, made a lot of good friends, learned a lot of tools and principles that helped me live a good, honest, sober life. And so I'm not into bashing traditional AA. I'm not into bashing faith-based approaches to recovery at all. Really, I kind of go by the tradition of attraction rather than promotion. I wanted to create an adapted version of the steps that was based more in psychology and practical actions, and have it be available to people who wanted it. And my hope is not to change AA or anything like that. It's a pretty grandiose thing to think I could even do in the first place. My hope is to just increase some of the tolerance in AA and show people who don't believe in God or a higher power that it doesn't have to be a deal breaker. You can still go to meetings and you can still find a way to work the steps that work for you, and you can get sober. I just believe everyone should have a chance to get sober, regardless of your worldview or religious beliefs or lack thereof. I am very grateful for my recovery. I'm not proud of it because I feel like that's taking too much credit for it. I am very grateful. I was born in a family that had, upper middle class. I had a lot of resources. I had some good support in my life. My parents were not super terrible enablers. They were for a while, but they figured it out pretty quick. So a lot of things went right early on in my addiction that got me into recovery quicker. And I'm very grateful for that, because I know a lot of people didn't have that. And my hat's off to anybody who's, had a different path. Earlier today, I was getting a message from an old friend of mine who is a Marine vet, and he was telling me how he's just like, I feel so bad when I compare myself to you because you've gotten sober and you've done all this, and I'm still here, And I was like, I haven't been through a quarter of what you've been through. You've been deployed overseas, you've been to war, you've seen things that I could not even imagine seeing in my own life. And your path is your path. And I believe that's true for everybody. So, yes, I did a lot of work to get sober, but a lot of it was luck too. A lot of it was luck and privilege. And rather than being proud and boastful, I'm grateful. And I feel like I can use my experience to help other people who maybe don't have the same tools that I did. So I'll talk about my story briefly. It's not that interesting. I started drinking and using at around the age of 16, 17. I was a late bloomer. And lucky for me, I was like a garbage pail addict. I just did whatever got me out of right here and right now. And that led to harder drugs like methamphetamine, things like that. And I'm actually grateful for that too, because it brought me down to my bottom really, really quick. And I realized that this just was not working. And I was a phenomenally low-functioning addict. I could not keep my shit together. I could not keep my stuff together. And so I initially got sober in, like I said before, Marijuana Anonymous, and I went to some AA meetings as well. And I felt actually at home right away. But there was just this nagging, I kept feeling like I was being pushed towards kind of a monotheistic Judeo-Christian type set of beliefs about my higher power. And it was kind of, I was looking at that door over there earlier. I can't see the sign from here, but it's like, it says off limits and it's wide open, which is exactly how I felt about traditional AA. It was like, come on in, come on in. It was like, you can have any higher power you want here. You can have, God is whatever you believe in. It could be a doorknob that also loves you. So it was kind of these conflicting messages that I was getting. It's like, yeah, you can believe whatever you want, but also it kind of needs to look like this. And so I got frustrated with it, and I tried to find a higher power, which also, if you think about it, is a very monotheistic traditional way to look at it. I don't have a higher power today. I have lots of higher powers in my life that keep me sober. I'll get into that later. But I couldn't, it didn't jive well with me. And so I eventually left the program, thought I could do this on my own. I still do not believe I can do this on my own. Thought maybe I could drink, 3 beers and then stop. I did once, and then I did not from that point on. I drank, and then I couldn't stop drinking. And I came back, but this time I was also, again, this is part of what I'm very grateful for, is that I had the resources to go to an inpatient treatment program that was very good and had a lot of really good therapists. It wasn't like Malibu great, but it was pretty good. I had a lot of incredible therapists that really motivated me and helped me understand what was going on in my own life, and it motivated me to want to become a therapist myself. After I left inpatient, I went back to meetings, but I was also still heavily involved in therapy. And then I also started going to school to become a therapist. And so I was lucky to have this experience of seeing recovery both from the 12-step perspective and from just kind of the mental health perspective. And I saw a lot of overlap. I saw a lot of ways that it just made sense to me on a psychological, behavioral, common sense level. And this is a book that I wanted to write for a long time, because I'd just been, it's kind of like my translation of the 12 steps for me, because I had to translate in meetings all the time in my head. People would say, I turned this over to my higher power today. I was like, okay, what does that mean? Because it's working. Someone turned their life over to a higher power, and it has helped them. I don't believe that it's a higher power that's helping them, but something is. So what is it? On a psychological level, what's happening? And so I just did a lot of translating in my head and kind of wove it together with the stuff that I was learning in school and through my practice and everything. And then I wrote this book, and I hope that it helps some people. So, by the way, if any of you guys have questions, I'm okay to answer questions while I'm up here. I don't have a canned speech that you're going to interrupt or anything. So I'll talk a little bit about the book and how I have it laid out and specifically what's in there. It was a pretty easy book to organize because the 12 steps, that was really helpful. It's good for a first book if you do it based off of a pre-existing list. So the book starts out with just setting the basic foundation for what recovery means in the context of not believing in God or a higher power. You know, what does it look like? And to put it simply, it's getting good at living life. Because the reason I drank and used was because I was not good at living life. I was not good at experiencing a challenge or a roadblock and figuring out how to manage my emotions and navigate the situation and work with the people and have, and manage the relationships. I just wasn't good at all that. So I just kind of fumbled my way through it and then would compensate by drinking or smoking or doing whatever to deal with all the leftover stress. I just was bad at life. And so it's about getting good at living life, getting good at communication, getting good at self-care, getting good at emotional regulation, all that good stuff. So the steps, some of them are quite a bit different. Obviously, step 3 had to be quite a bit different. And some of them are a lot the same. And I still need to look at them because I thought that after I wrote them, I'd memorize them pretty easily. But I realized I memorized the original steps because I heard them 8,000 times. And I have not heard these steps that many times. I wrote them once and read them maybe 5 or 6 times. So I'm still learning my own steps. So step 1, admitted we were caught in a self-destructive cycle and currently lacked the tools to stop it. So I don't get too caught up on the word addiction here. Addiction has been talked about in kind of this binary sense. You're either an addict or you're not. Like someone mentioned earlier, are you a real alcoholic or not? I don't personally believe in that. I haven't personally seen that. I've seen that it exists, like most things in life, on a spectrum. Some people are very, very, very addicted, meaning they've lost complete control. Some people still have a little bit of control. So whatever. As far as I'm concerned, if there's any amount of control that you've lost over a certain behavior or a substance, congratulations, you're part of the club, and you don't have to compare yourself to other people. If you find yourself moving towards a certain behavior or substance more than you'd like to, there's probably something going on. There's probably something that you're compensating for. There's something that you're seeking comfort in, and that's worth looking at. Step number 2, trusted that a healthy lifestyle was attainable through social support and consistent self-improvement. I got rid of the word insanity because it's my book and I can do what I want to do. I didn't like the word insanity. It's just, a lot of the original 12-step approach felt very shame-based to me, and I was not a big fan of that. And you hear it a lot, people talking about I remember once at a meeting early on, I said to somebody, I was like, wow, thanks so much for your share. And he was like, well, it wasn't me, it was God. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it was you. I just saw you talking. And it just never made sense to me the way these people could anything good, they would totally put down and be like, that was just God. And all the bad stuff, we got to write a list. And we got to really dive into it. I didn't really like that. Shame was a big part of my addiction. And so I wanted something that was more empowering. Again, not saying that we can do this on our own. Not saying that we can sit there and just be sober. I don't think that works for most people. But I think there's something to be said for giving ourselves credit for the work that we do and understanding that recovery is our responsibility, and there are practical actions that we can take on a daily basis to make it happen in our lives. Step number 3 is a big one. Committed to a lifestyle of recovery, focusing only on what we could control. Again, nothing to turn your will and your life over to. You're just committing. which is kind of what I think step 3 is anyway. People are committing to the rest of the program. And focusing only on what we could control, in my view, that is what is primarily happening when people turn something, when people turn their life over to the care of a higher power, what I see that as is they're letting go. It's not necessarily that they're giving it to any outside entity. They're just not trying to control it all themselves anymore. And so that's what I wanted to put in step 3. It's the act of letting go and focusing only on the things that we can change, because when I start to focus on what other people are doing and what other people need to do to make me happy, I'm miserable, and my happiness is no longer in my hands. It's the responsibility of everyone else's actions, the actions that I can't control. 4, made a comprehensive list of our resentments, fears, and harmful actions. Super similar. I felt like it was a little bit puritanical to separate sex. And we're going to do a sex list. It's over here. It's just all the harms. Let's just put them all together. There's nothing that has to be particularly dirty about sexual harms. They're just harms. 5, shared our list with a trustworthy person. 6, made a list of our unhealthy character traits. So one of the biggest changes that I made in this book was to take kind of a much more active cognitive behavioral approach to steps 6 and 7. In the original 164 pages, steps 6 and 7 is something like 3 lines or something like that. We say, hey, I don't want this anymore, and then we go, here you go, and that's the whole thing, and that again never made sense to me. And it never worked for me. And if it works for you, that's awesome. Again, I have no judgment against people who take a faith-based approach, who have a higher power that works, that can take things out of their lives that they don't want. Awesome. For me, that didn't work. Just kind of praying for something to be taken away, a character trait to be taken away, didn't work for me. But what I learned through my own therapy and through being a therapist is that we can change our behaviors and we can change our thoughts. And it's a slow, systematic, very boring. It's not nearly as sexy as a big spiritual awakening, but it's a slow, systematic process of changing the way we think and changing the way we act, and therefore it changes us. So, step 6 has made a list of our unhealthy character traits. We got this from step 4, mostly, because it shows us what we did to harm people. And then we work on cultivating a healthy version of that. I do not like the phrase character defects, again, because of the shame stuff. We're not broken. We're not broken. We all have developed coping techniques and strategies to deal with life that worked for us at some point. There was some point in our lives where the not so good stuff that we're doing was helping us. You know, if you grow up, for example, in a family where your needs aren't met, it makes sense for you to become very self-absorbed and selfish because you have to take care of yourself because nobody else is. But now that we're out into the real world, it becomes maladaptive. It becomes problematic. It pushes people away. So, okay, it's not working for us anymore. How can we slide this a little bit more towards a healthy kind of behavior and slowly change the way that we interact with ourselves, with others, and with the world? So, I'll talk more about that later if you want. Step 8, determine the best way to make amends to those we had harmed. Totally very similar. 9, made direct amends. Some I just had to change the wording because if one was the exact same, it just felt weird. They all had to be a little different at least. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would cause harm. That sounds very similar, I understand. I did change the harm them or others is what it originally says, right? Injure, right, yeah, okay, no injure, harm, and then also ourselves. There was kind of this, again, it was sort of this shame-based approach and this self-flagellation thing of like, you know, I heard a lot of people talking about, I don't care what happens to me when I make amends? You know, I just have to make amends, even if it means I have to go to jail or this or that. And I don't know that I fully agree with that, and I think it's worth talking over with your sponsor. But the idea there is that we don't want to cause any more harm to anybody. We've done enough harm to ourselves and others. Let's just stop with the harm already. Step 10, practice daily self-reflection and continued making amends wherever necessary. Another way to say the same thing, just daily self-reflection. I do not push for that to be in any kind of specific sort of writing or activity or anything like that. Some people really do great with writing. Some people don't. Some people just do better stopping a couple times throughout the day and just thinking, okay, what have I done today? Have I hurt anybody? Have I been a bad person? Have I, who have I hurt? What do I need to make amends for? Step 11, we started meditating. Shortened it down. And I actually enjoy prayer. I think it's kind of neat. It's powerful. I don't think I'm talking to anybody, but I think when I express an intention verbally, even if it's just out into the air, may I be well today, may others be well today, may I have a good day, may I, treat others with love and respect. It registers in my head, and I think it has an impact on my behavior and my mentality for that day. I don't think any external force is doing that for me, but it does make a difference. So I don't have a problem with prayer in and of itself. I just didn't want to put it in here because people would immediately throw out the book. So we started meditating. Meditation has been, I never shut up about meditation when I'm talking to my clients or people that I work with in the program. It's so helpful and has been so helpful for me. One of the biggest issues I have is being aware of what's going on with myself and addressing it before it turns into a behavior, before it becomes a problem. So noticing that I'm angry or resentful or hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or something's or jealous or whatever, anxious, noticing it makes it easier to do something about it. And that's not something I was ever good at because I didn't care about noticing it. I just knew kind of somewhere deep down that I didn't like the way I was feeling, and I would immediately go to numb out. I would go play video games, I would go smoke, I would go drink, I would go do whatever. So I never really practiced the skill of pausing and seeing what was going on internally. And meditation really helps with that. And just a brief primer on meditation. I tell pretty much all of my clients to meditate, and they come back to me almost invariably, even when I've explained it. They come back to me and they're like, it didn't work. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean it didn't work? And they said, it didn't clear my mind. It didn't calm me down. It does not always do that. Meditation does not always clear your mind. Meditation doesn't always necessarily feel good. I like to think of it as going to the gym for your mind. What you are doing is you are practicing bringing your attention back to your internal experience and the present moment, repeatedly. I don't care if you get distracted every 20 seconds. That's great if you're going 20 seconds. I don't care if you get distracted every second. Bring your attention back to the moment, back to the moment, back to the moment. I have meditated many times where 19 minutes I'm thinking about dinner, and 1 minute I'm actually present. That's a success. That's a success because you think of it as lifting a weight every time you bring your attention back to the present. That's what we're practicing. It's not always fun. It's not always relaxing. That being said, I think it's important for me to have relaxation as part of my self-care, but I keep that separate from meditation. So, super important. And also, a lot of us didn't have parents who taught us how to be aware of what was going on. If you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Or if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Like that kind of message, a lot of us got. It's just like, you're having a feeling, stop. Don't have the feeling. Just because it's bothering me. Stop having the feeling and just move on with your life. And that's a message a lot of us got. And so we were never taught. Ideally, we would have our parents come to us and be like, wow, it looks like you're sad. Oh, it looks like you're angry. And through that, we learn like, oh, that's what that weird feeling in my chest is. That's what that impulse to punch the wall is coming from. Oh, cool. Now I have a word for it. Now I have a language. Now I can talk about it. Many of us did not get that. And so this is one of the ways to get better at seeing what's going on and identifying that. All right, I'm going to shut up about meditation now. Number 12, sought to retain our newfound recovery lifestyle by teaching it to those willing to learn and by surrounding ourselves with healthy people. I'm still a big believer that there's no better way to learn something and get good at something than by doing it yourself, or by teaching it and showing other people how to do it. That has been super, super important for me. I'm very fortunate that I get to work professionally with addicts and all kinds of people. Because for me, that's a very rewarding thing. I get to do it every day. I get to help people. And a lot of the times when I'm talking to people about stuff that they should be doing, I'm like, you should meditate. And then I'm like, oh, I should meditate. I forgot about that one. I'm telling other people to do it, and then I'm like, all right, I should be doing that too. And it's great. It's a great way to remember what you've learned, what I've learned. Speaking for myself. So those are the steps, the way as Jeff sees them. And afterwards, I talk a little bit about what the steps miss. It can be argued that the steps don't miss anything. Some people like to think of the steps as sort of a cure-all, and I guess you can fit whatever doesn't get addressed into like 6 and 7. You can just call it a character defect and say, see, it does address it. But I'm of the opinion that it misses a lot of really important stuff. You know, the first time, this is especially at MA, Marijuana Anonymous, with the food. The first time I went to a meeting, there was cake, and everyone's smoking cigarettes, and everyone's drinking coffee. Not that there's a problem with cigarettes or coffee or food, but they're not great for a healthy lifestyle. And that seems to be very much overlooked in a lot of the 12-step programs. So I write about that a little bit in the book, and just how important it is to take care of ourselves. There is no separation between, as far as I'm concerned, between our mind and our bodies. They're very interlinked. If we're taking care of ourselves physically, we're going to be doing doing better mentally, and vice versa. I talk quite a bit about mental health in this book. I know that the big book does say you can, seek outside help, and I appreciate that it says that. But again, and also there's often a big difference between what it says in the book and what you hear at meetings. So a lot of what I'm talking about here is not so much what the original big book says. I quite like the original big book. It's got a lot of great stuff in it, and it's actually very kind of like, hey, here's this if you want it. It's just what happens when people get a hold of a belief system. It turns into all kinds of things. I have heard a lot of people talk about how the steps should be able to deal with just about anything. If you work the steps, you'll be right as rain. Particularly Pacific Group, stuff like that. Saying you shouldn't take. Sorry, should I not have said that? I just saw someone gasp when I said that. I'm a big fan of getting outside help, making sure you're seeing a mental health professional if that's something that you want to do, if that's something that you need to do. The 12 steps are not treatment for mental health necessarily. And then a lot of stuff about relationships too. I write about communication, assertive communication. Assertive communication is one of the most important things that I ever learned in recovery. Speaking up for myself in relationship to other people, saying, hey, I don't want to do this, or hey, I don't prefer that, or please don't treat me that way, or don't talk to me that way, or it's such a powerful thing, and it's so hard for so many of us to do. Again, because many of us grew up in families where we weren't given that space. What we wanted didn't matter. What we needed didn't matter. It matters. And we are the only ones that are going to be able to take ownership of that and teach other people that what I want matters. it's nobody else's job to be like, hey, you've got needs and make sure those needs are getting met. It's totally our responsibility. And so assertive communication, being able to say what you mean directly and without apology is super important. And that's pretty much everything with the book and my story and all that, and my outline is complete. So yeah, questions? Thank you guys.
Hi there, Jeff. I'm Alex. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Alex.
I am loving your book, and I particularly like the part at the end about what the steps miss. And I was wondering, you already spoke about it a little bit, but do you have any ideas of how some of these tools that we use now, like CBT, EMDR, communication, hobbies, all those things, have you put any thought into how we might incorporate those into like our modern AA, or have you even thought or foresee there being problems with bringing those outside issues into AA?
That's a good question. I don't know. So are you talking about potentially bringing that like formally into AA, having it more of a formal part of AA?
One thing I do like about the secular meetings, I think a lot of us appreciate, is there's more talk of what traditionally calls outside issues. So I am trying to think of other ways to open the door for some of those other modalities that help a lot of us without undermining the traditions in AA.
Right. The first thing that comes to mind for me is just that it's a matter of education. It's a matter of, bringing more of the mental health world, the knowledge from the mental health world into AA. Not necessarily changing AA, but just having, more of the education in there so people understand that there are a lot of components to a healthy lifestyle, and there's a lot of stuff that's not explicitly mentioned in the book that's still really important to incorporate in our lives. Maybe if we're lucky, we can get like a pamphlet in there or something that talks about hobbies and other means of maintaining sanity. But that's a good question. I'd like to see more, but I'm not sure how that would look.
Well, your book definitely has a lot of that great stuff, so thank you.
Thanks.
If anybody wants to speak or ask a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring the cordless mic to you. Let me guess, you want to speak?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Tisa. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for your talk. My question is about the first step, your rewriting of the first step and some of the ideas you shared with us. Could you remind me of what that was again?
My first step?
Yes, please.
All right. So, I know you didn't mean anything by it, but when people say rewriting the steps, it kind of like, it's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to rewrite the steps. The steps are there. Awesome. Leave the steps. Here's some different steps over here if anyone wants them. So that's, I really try and emphasize that approach. Okay, step one, admitted we were caught in a self-destructive cycle and currently lacked the tools to stop it.
Okay, thank you. My question about that is, so in my professional discipline, there are a lot of people that have a problem with drinking, with the overuse of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And recently, someone who has a public face in my discipline put out a blog post that got a lot of attention that had the word alcoholism in the title. And then in the text, this person obviously is not in mental health or is an alcoholic in my opinion, but whatever. And then in the text suggested that we try controlled drinking and that everybody in our discipline maybe try to control themselves a little bit more. And since a lot of us that are in recovery are in hiding about it, we couldn't really speak out publicly, but you could see the kind of snide comments popping up on social media here and there saying that's not how alcoholism works.
Right.
And I'm just not discounting what you were saying about that. It's more complicated than just
You can do that.
a dichotomy. But I do think that a distinction can be helpful when trying to get help and have what we experience be recognized as not just, I just lost control a little bit.
Right.
And so I just wanted to know your thoughts about that. Thank you.
Right. So, yeah, it's a tough one because I want to be inclusive, but I don't want to be too inclusive. I don't want people who are just like, I dropped my champagne glass by the pool and I'm clearly an alcoholic. Like, I want, the point is control. If there's any measure of control that has been lost and can't be regained, that's what I choose to think of as addiction. When it comes to people identifying as a certain thing and then speaking for everybody else, I wish I had some control over that, but I don't. It drives me crazy. It's something I went through pains to not do in my book. I don't want to talk about what anyone else is or is going through. This is what worked for me. This is an available path, period. And I think there will always be people who are like, well, this is my experience and therefore it must be your experience too. And if your experience is not my experience, then it's not the thing that I have. And I don't know that there's a great solution to that other than, again, education and showing people that this is a very nuanced thing and everybody's experience is unique, and what's important is being really honest with yourself about what your experience is, what your relationship is to any behavior or substance. And if you have the belief that you can use like a gentleman or gentlewoman, then cool, but don't go around telling other people, hey, you got to try this. Try it yourself, and if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, come back, and that's it. So I don't know if that answered your question. Sort of, kind of. All right.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. In my ninth step, my sponsor, thank goodness for him, saved me from going and becoming a guest of the state. And by pointing out to me that there would be some long-term consequences to my family that if I were to go away for an extended period. And at the same time, he was very willing for me to go and make amends that resulted in me being assaulted a couple times. But in hindsight, I asked for it and I deserved every bit of it. And however, I'm not sure what your approach to the value of sponsorship, and is it a fundamental notion in your mind's eye?
Very good question. Thank you for that. I didn't touch on that. Sponsorship is not an easy job, and it's not a job I think everybody is cut out for. There is kind of an unspoken rule that like everyone needs to go on to sponsor once you've gotten past a certain point. I do not believe that to be the case. I think there's a lot of ways that people can be of service and be helpful to others. It doesn't even have to be in program, but I believe service and being of service to others is important and helpful. Don't necessarily think that needs to come in the form of sponsorship. I do think sponsorship is very, very important in my program. Sorry, that just sounds so weird to say. In this version, in my point of view, sponsorship is super important. Again, I'm not, because I'm trying to be nuanced and I don't want to be black and white. Is it 100% necessary for everyone? I don't know. I don't know. Can someone get, I'm writing the workbook for this, by the way. It'll be available in a few months. If someone just gets the workbook and they fill out the workbook and they're like, woo, and they're all better, awesome. But in my experience, I had to have somebody there. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in program. It could be a therapist. It could be a mentor, someone who's just really has got their stuff together and is living a healthy life and can mentor you and teach you how to live a healthy, productive life. Cool. But someone had to be there to call me on my stuff and question me. I'm not a fan of sponsorship in like this person makes all my decisions for me, which you see a lot. It's like, oh, I want to decide. I wasn't sure if I should have chocolate cake or lemon, and so I called my sponsor. It's like, it's too much. Like, I'm not a fan of that approach. But when it comes to big decisions, I think it's important to have somebody to run it by, to give feedback. But I also think it's very important for sponsors to be humble and, even as a mental health professional, which still feels weird for me to say, I don't know exactly what's right for anybody. I give suggestions and I say, hey, try this. I've seen this work with other people. This has worked for me. Give it a shot. See what happens. So I think that's really important for sponsors to take an approach where they're just really, they follow the other person's lead to an extent, offer suggestions, don't, come across as though they're the absolute last word on everything. And I think that'll go a lot better than it does in some cases. But I am a fan of the idea of sponsorship and obviously social support and helping each other. I think that's critical.
My question is abstinence the only solution to this problem? I have tried this naltrexone.
Mm-hmm.
It's called, I think, the Sinclair
method, yes.
And it didn't work for me. Abstinence is the only solution for me. But has there been any success with this?
My understanding with the Sinclair method is that what they do is take naltrexone and then drink, and it lowers the amount of reward received from the drink, and therefore it just kind of phases out because it's not doing the same thing for them. But the ultimate goal, I believe, is still abstinence, is still complete abstinence. Not that they would then be able to drink once in a while. Is that correct? All right, I'm getting various nods and shakes. So my concern would be, this is totally just me guessing. My concern would be then if you stop taking the naltrexone and you haven't dealt with the underlying issues that are causing you to drink and seek escape in the first place, and you're not taking the naltrexone and then you drink again, it's going to feel great because you haven't dealt with any of the underlying stuff. The naltrexone's not in your body. You're still the same. You're still wired the same. And so the alcohol, all of a sudden, you're going to be like, oh, that naltrexone sucks. This is great. And so I don't know how I feel about that as a long-term solution. I think a lot of people struggle with chronic relapse and have a really hard time just getting that initial boost to get sober and get started and actually start working on themselves and doing the internal work necessary to stay sober. I think for them it might be a great approach to try, see if it works, see if it gets their foot in the door and it gets them farther than they've been able to get on their own. I think that's great. In terms of moderation, that's everybody's journey to kind of figure out on their own. I've known some people who allegedly went back to drinking just once in a while and they realized it was all a big misunderstanding and they're just like, oh, what was that about? I thought I was an alcoholic. And then I've heard stories, I've not seen it. There's no research studies. Is it possible? Sure. I know myself it's not going to happen for me. It's not going to happen for me. It's just like it's a hardwired thing. Like, if you told me, if you waved a magic wand and said, you can now drink normally, I would say, oh my gosh, I'm going to do it all the time. It's just how my brain works. I don't get it. It doesn't work, it doesn't compute.
Is it possible to be in AA and have nothing wrong with you?
It's not possible to have nothing wrong with you. We all have something wrong with us, which means none of us does, but we all have something that we're struggling with. And we all, if you pick out any person in this room or out and watch them for long enough, and you're going to see some area where they're doing something to compensate in some way, shape, or form. They're doing something to relieve stress, something that's not perfect and helping them grow, and what we would consider a quote-unquote positive coping skill. So do I believe? I have yet to meet anybody in AA or out who doesn't have some stuff that they're struggling with. I mean, it's just universal. Oh, you. Well, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I don't understand this business. I'm always working on yourself.
Please write a book. I will buy it. I want to hear your story and how that happened, and how somebody with nothing wrong with them ended up in this room today. Oh. But it's something, and you may not know what it is. And a lot of us don't know what it is at first. We're not aware of what's causing us to drink. When I first got into recovery, I was like, I drink because I like it. Not because I like it, because I love it. But then I came to find out later on, I loved it for a reason. There was something it was doing for me. There was something it was covering up. But I didn't get a chance to see it and uncover it until I was sober for a period of time. You may have nothing. It might just be some faulty wiring. I don't know. I can't tell you that. But that's your journal. That's your journal. That's your journey. Who's next?
Hi, it's Ralph again.
Oh, hi.
We started Secular up in Langley, BC in August of 2016, and then in January of 2018, we had some newcomers that wanted to do the steps. So the first time through the steps, we used a book called The Alternate 12 Steps and the 12 by 12. Found that very painful using the 12 by 12. So the next time around, we went through just with the alternate 12-step book that's on the AA Agnostica site. And we're just going to finish it in a couple of weeks, and we're going to start using your book to do the steps. So it's nice to hear that you're coming out with a workbook. Would it be a guide to do the steps using your book?
It's going to be loosely based on the book. I'm only like a 15th of the way through it right now, and I'm in grad school, so it's a slow process. But it's going to be like a big kind of workbook style. You can actually write in it some stuff like, fourth step is probably going to still need to be done on a separate piece of paper. But for the most part, it's its own deal.
I think our plan is to go cover to cover in your book, but there's a section that's dedicated step 1 to 12. So I don't know whether in the future whether we would go cover to cover or just do the steps. Would you, how would you think that would work?
You're asking if I would suggest going through the steps 1 to 12 or going through the book cover to cover? Go through the whole book. I wrote it and I think it's great. But it's up to you. It's up to you. I think there's some value in the stuff before and after. It really depends. It's however you want to use it, whatever works for you. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask it again? If I'm confused, I might be confused.
No. But a section of your book is just the steps, like 1 to 12.
Yeah.
But you got some dialogue.
It's mostly the steps,
beginning.
and then there's a section before and after. Yeah.
So we're going to use the whole book.
Okay, cool. I am okay with that.
Thank you for your discussion. I think one of the issues that has come up for me, and it's similar to, I think, to what you were talking about. My home group is actually a 12 and 12 group. It's a traditional AA, although I'm one of the founders of the Freethinkers Living Sober group in Cottonwood 5 years ago. But I have a sense that one of the distinctive differences that I have a lot of times with the 12 and 12 is this idea that my alcoholism is caused by underlying causes and conditions. And I'm wondering if, many years ago, they came out with this idea of a type 1 alcoholic and a type 2 alcoholic, type 1 being born alcoholic and a type 2 becoming an alcoholic, whatever. But I'm wondering if that might not be a possibility, that there may be some predisposition or some physiological condition that is involved in alcoholism such that a person is an alcoholic if they drink. So that I guess what I've come to is I don't work the steps in order to not drink. I work the steps in order to become a better human being, in order to be able to live more comfortably inside myself and that kind of thing, which I see as somewhat different. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to that idea, or...
Yeah, yes, I agree. For me, the steps are so that I can live better and be a better person and all that, but really, at least the first goal was to stop drinking and to stay stopped. And I think that helps with that. I think it's way harder to stop drinking if you're out there harming people and just being a generally horrible person. I'm terrible with multi-part questions. What was the first part again? I'm sorry.
I guess what I'm getting at is it possible?
Sort of. So the research that I've looked into, I'm not like a super research nerd, but the literature that I've looked into suggests that there almost certainly is a genetic component to addiction. There absolutely is. Has anyone done like the 23andMe, given your DNA over to whoever? Over to Big Brother. I had this gene that, it was the funniest thing. I thought it was a joke. It was a gene that made me less likely to learn from my mistakes. And it was highly associated with addiction and alcoholism, and that makes sense, right? I'm like, this time it'll work. That makes sense, and it had something to do with an insufficient amount of dopamine receptors in a certain part of the brain, and so when I had a negative consequence, it didn't stick as well. Okay, that's a bummer. I'd like to be able to fix that, but so there most certainly is a genetic component. Having said that, there's also a lot of research to show that, again, this is something that someone mentioned earlier, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, make you much more likely to engage in that kind of behavior later on. So again, it's not black or white. I think there certainly is a genetic component. It sounds kind of like what you're asking is, it's like a thought experiment. Hypothetically, if somebody lived a perfect life, whatever that means, and they had a certain set of wiring in there already, would they still become an alcoholic even without any nature? And I think that's highly unlikely. I guess it's possible, but again, I have yet to meet anybody who has addiction to anything that doesn't have some emotional and relational stuff that's going on underneath it.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I just wanted to thank you for the book. I have skimmed it. I have not read it in its entirety, but it is, for everything that I can see, really well researched, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And what's in there is super familiar to me and comforting, because my recovery program of choice for the last 10 years has been Smart Recovery. And so I'm actually here, hi, I'm with Smart Recovery, because I wanted to get to know this group a little bit better. I know that there's a fair amount of overlap, and wanted to kind of see what this was all about, and got an opportunity to be kind of witness to some amazing conversations and this presentation. Part of my wish for the recovery world is that we do all connect a little bit better, and we start interacting with each other a little bit more often, and in ways that are maybe a little bit more substantive and less sneering. And I haven't seen very much sneering here today, and I was sort of expecting it, so that's really cool. with a book like yours that brings in so much of the science, so much of the cognitive behavioral stuff, to go back to what I think was Alex's question from the very beginning of this panel, how does that connect then with traditional AA? I did not choose AA when I was getting sober 10 years ago just because of the God stuff. The God stuff was big, but I've been an atheist since I was about 11 years old. That's not the only reason. The way that you have characterized the first step in your program makes a lot of sense to me, but I find it incompatible with the way that I have read the first step in traditional AA all of my life. My grandmother was huge. So how does that work? How does that connect? And how do people feel about it? Is there common ground for us?
Yes. Absolutely. Good question. I think if you read the book, you'll get that question answered. It's absolutely, so it's, my program is not as reliant on meetings as traditional AA, but it still talks about them quite a bit, and I recommend it highly just as a form of social support and all that jazz. There's a lot of good that it does. So you were saying that you found the first step incompatible with the original first step?
I find them dramatically different. I find your first step pretty much something that I can pretty much swallow. The first step in traditional AA, I find anathema, and I can't get even, a football field close to it.
So what is it about the traditional first step that's most off-putting to you?
So powerlessness.
Right.
And all I have to do is admitted I was part instead of you were caught in yours. I can change that teeny little bit for me, and it works just fine.
Okay. I'm not sure how to answer your question. If anybody else has some good responses to that, I'd be very happy to hear you.
And we'll see it tomorrow.
No, don't be shy. You were starting to raise your hand.
And we'll see you at tomorrow's We Agnostics meeting.
I have one at 7:30.
We're at 1:30.
Hey, Jeff, aside from the reviews that we can all read on Amazon, what are some of the more impactful feedback things that you've gotten about the book that you've written? And are there meetings here or throughout the world that are actually using your steps as their text?
There are a couple. It's really weird and it's surreal to hear that when I get like an email from someone across the country who's like, yeah, we're starting a book study based on your book. It's awesome. Probably the best feedback that I've gotten, the most rewarding feedback that I've gotten was from people of faith, believers who read the book and they were like, this is great. It's not bashing anything. It's not talking about how my way is wrong. It just lays out a very practical path. And then, nothing in here says that you have to be a staunch non-believer to work these steps. It's just saying you don't have to be a believer to work the steps. And there's a big difference. I'm not saying you have to deny the existence of God. I don't even fully deny the existence of God. I'm what Richard Dawkins calls a de facto atheist. I think it's very, very, very unlikely. I don't believe there is one, but I don't have the bravado to say there is certainly no God, and I'm sure of it. So I'm like a 6.9 on a scale of 1 to 7. So, So yeah, that's the best thing that I've heard is that believers can use it, and you can, and this is compatible with, even though it sounds weird, a belief in a higher power. You can kind of add that onto this program, and it still, I think, fits nicely. I think, if I do say so myself.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
I haven't even skimmed your book because I just bought it. But
thank you.
I liked what you said about a higher power and that you had a lot of higher powers, and that's what I've mentioned before to people. I said, It doesn't say the highest power. And so therefore I think that there are a lot of possibilities for that. But, and I also agree with the sponsorship. I never realized how much I was going to learn about myself until I became a sponsor. It was faster than anything. And sponsorship is like parenthood. It's a very big job taken on by total amateurs. And
That's a good way to put
so
it.
you grow as you
Yeah.
get it. But in response to it ties in with the lady in the back about the your steps. And one of the reasons I think maybe that you're not remembering your steps either is I started writing my own steps, and then I rewrote them, and then I rewrote them, and I almost rewrite them on a daily basis, I think. And so I suggest to our group, which we've read the alternative steps, and now I'll read yours to them, but the ones in the little book, but I suggest to people that they write their own steps. And I think it's a real learning process to try and put down what each one means to you in as small amount of words as you can, but still gets the point across. So
Absolutely.
that's all I had. Thanks.
I like that.
Yeah, my first sponsor and my parents were very similar. They both messed me up.
Jerry, an alcoholic.
Jerry.
You can edit out my name if you want, but I'm with Dr. Bob on that. We shouldn't be anonymous from each other. Question on, because you are a mental health provider. I've been reading so much about Obamacare and the rollout of Obamacare, which is not, I don't know, it's past halfway maybe, but there's more of it to come. And one of it clearly is, and they seem to be very clear about this, and so do the other government agencies that are pushing it, is something called the final rule. Such an ominous sound to it, the final rule, you know. But it doesn't mean that. It simply means that the federal government will not support or indulge or whatever, have anything to do with faith-based treatment of alcoholism or drug addiction. They will only have evidence-based treatment. They said over and over, on all these sites you go on and these podcasts and whatnot, evidence-based treatment, evidence-based treatment. The federal government will no longer support anything in the mental health area of substance abuse if it's not evidence-based. If it's faith-based, they won't touch it. So that would certainly affect a lot of people. And I thought, and again, as a provider, you could probably shed some light on this. I thought that would mean like the end of treatment centers, because, or they'll have to switch to a more MAT, medical assisted treatment, or CBT. CBT is the one the government keeps pushing so much because it is evidence-based, and they do have proof that works. They also have proof that this doesn't work. So if that's the case, if I'm reading correctly and understanding all of this, what's your take on that?
That's quite a question. So the evidence-based stuff is, it's a little bit of a mixed bag for me, because I think evidence-based approaches are really important, but it's also important to look at how slow evidence moves, and also how hard it is to measure certain aspects of success. Like really, if you want to become overwhelmed and confused, go home tonight and try to design a study that actually accurately measures how well a 12-step program works. Just give it a shot. It's so hard. I mean, it's like the things that you have to account for. What are they going there for? What kind of work have they done? Have they just gone to the meeting, or have they... there's just so, what kind of sponsor do they have? Did they work the steps? Did they not work the steps? Did they work the steps, or did they work my steps? What happened? It's very hard to design a study that actually measures for that. So I think there are some holes in evidence-based practice, and I think it's a little dangerous to just say, if it's not evidence-based, we won't cover it at all, because I think there are a lot of things that work that aren't necessarily backed up by abundant research yet. And I think evidence-based stuff should always be a priority because we found that it works, so it should always be there. But I think there should still be room for other approaches and supplemental approaches in addition to that. So again, I think it's a nuanced thing, and I think to just draw a hard line between evidence-based and non-evidence-based is not the right way to approach it.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Brad. Just a comment about the nature of the genetics in this, just my experience. Mm-hmm. I'm adopted. I was one of 10 children, 5 were adopted. I never pursued my family or wanted to find out. I didn't have a good childhood, but I figured they didn't want me. To hell with that. On one of my job sites, I was leaving this site about 12 years ago, and a young lady, a flag girl, looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, you're my missing uncle. My mom's been looking for you." She was one of the 5 adopted children. So we went to a small community in BC to meet her. She was drunk. She was a mess. She'd met the other 3 adopted kids. They were all a mess and drunk, and she was quite shocked to find that I wasn't drinking. Said, "Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you," and never talked to her again. Mm-hmm. I went on Ancestry DNA, and a young lady contacted me, and she said, "My father was one of the original 5. I have pictures of all your brothers and sisters, the ones who weren't put up for adoption." I guess my biological father was a bad alcoholic, so by the time 5 were born, they had to get rid of the next 5 because they couldn't support him. So we've got 10 children here, 5 who grew up in one environment, and 5 more who grew up in 5 entirely different environments. All of us are alcoholics or addicts.
Sure.
There's only 3 of us alive. I'm the only one that's sober. I had 2 children biologically, and I raised 2 children that weren't mine. Same house, same parents, same environment. Both of my biological children, even though they knew about Daddy, both alcoholics. Both non-biological kids grew up in the same house. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Apparently, in the late 30s or the early 40s, the Guinness Company did quite a bit of studies, and they realized that over 50% of their product was being bought by 10% of their customers. And so they targeted those customers. They gave them platters, they gave them posters, they gave them calendars, they gave them cups, so that logo was in the house of their customers. Their customer base has grown exponentially from the children, and they have very good research that shows them that this is definitely partially a genetic problem. That's just my experience.
Very interesting.
My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Did you ever think about writing something that wasn't based on the number 12? I'm getting a little tired of 12 this and that. Yeah,
I
the
did.
decimal system, 10 or 22 or something like that.
I did, and it's still my intention to write sort of an approach that's even beyond 12 steps. That's just general. The reason I stuck with 12 for this is because I wanted it to be a bridge for people who were already in the 12 steps to stay in the 12, because still there's nothing quite like the 12-step. There's nothing quite like AA out there when it comes to size and availability of support. So I think it's important to have, for some people, to have kind of a translation, a guide to survival in AA, which is sort of how I see this, and then the rest is another book.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful. The first thing I liked is Jerry's question, but my question is, isn't there a lot of evidence that shows that faith works? And it goes directly to, I'm on the same page as you are regarding prayer. I find that prayer, setting my own intent, changes my behavior, changes my actions, and things actually occur the way I want them to occur. Right. I don't believe, like you said, I don't believe that there's a third party intervening or granting me my wish or whatever. But anyway, but I do believe that, intent and awareness are real important. And that's all driven by faith. I mean, I believe that there's lots of things on the power of prayer and whatnot. And then there was a second part. Joel's moving in on me, though. I think I've forgotten this second part. Thanks, I appreciate it.
I'm wondering if you've read anything on interpersonal neurobiology. It happens to be, somebody asked me one time what I meant by spirituality, and I told them interpersonal neurobiology is what I mean by that. And there's a guy out at UCLA that has done a lot of work, especially with children, but talking about how important that interpersonal relationship is neurologically and biologically.
Right.
And for me, that's when people talk about, oh, well, I pray, but that's as far as it goes. And I do. I don't believe in God, but I do believe in prayer. And I just wonder if you've had any exposure to that area, because it's pretty interesting.
Not that topic specifically named that way, but interpersonal neurobiology just sounds to me like relationships. Yeah, that too. But yeah, it sounds like relationships. It's a fancy way to say what happens to the brain in relationship. And I don't know a lot of the details. I just know that the evidence shows that we are highly social creatures, and we do better when we're surrounded by other people and part of a community and working together. And so just, on a biological level, I think that's a very practical way to approach recovery. A very practical tool in recovery is the interpersonal relationships. But I'll read more on that. I like the topic.
Just letting you know, we got 15 minutes left with Jeff.
That's a lot of time.
Okay.
Please ask me a 14-minute question.
I don't have one of those. I appreciate everything you've said and what you've chosen to do with your life, so thank you.
Thanks.
My question is, if we can, with enough, recovery work, support, and self-improvement, lose the desire to use or drink, do we also, what is your opinion on whether you can lose the need to identify for the rest of your life as an alcoholic or an addict and stay in a recovery program? Or, will I just be normal one day? Thank you.
I love that question. It's my favorite. Will I be normal one day? Finally? When will it happen? Right, maybe. My memory is shot today. This is why I started an MA. My short-term memory is shot. I forgot your question. I'm sorry. I have such a bad memory.
Do you think that recovery and identification as an addict needs to be a lifelong process?
Thank you. I believe that's up to you. That's up to everyone. No, I don't know. Is that the right answer? What? You look so disappointed by my answer. Yes, no, maybe? Whatever makes you happy. That's my people pleaser side. I think it's totally up to you. I say, just to speak for myself, I say I'm in recovery. I don't say I'm an alcoholic or I do sometimes. It doesn't mean a whole lot to me, though. It's like, it's a small part of who I am based on previous behavior. I don't use it as a label to identify what I am, just like I don't say, I am a husband. Like, well, that's one role that I have in my life. That's one part of me. But everyone's got lots of different things that make them them. And I think, I think it's important to acknowledge your past and come to terms with it and accept it, but not necessarily dwell on it. So that's the way I look at it.
Hi, Chris again.
Hi, I know you.
Hey, and this has to do with the MA thing. So I remembered what I was going to.
You have a better memory than I do.
But I very much appreciate what you said about meditation and how helpful it's been. And I'm on the same page. Meditation has been extraordinarily helpful for me. It's been a game changer, provided, I maintain a regular practice. I found that much like brushing my teeth, if I do it daily, that's a pretty good thing. If I do it once a week, well, my results are kind of not so hot. Anyway, but what meditation has done for me has been to do with awareness, right? Almost purely. That's the whole deal with it for me. It's nice if I'm happy and mellow and all that, but that hasn't been it. It's been my ability to be aware of what's going on right here, right now.
Yeah.
And I found that when I fall away from the practice, that awareness falls away pretty quickly.
It sure can.
And in particular, and you talked about step 6 and 7 and your CBT approach. For me, the awareness, and maybe this is the same as CBT, I don't know, but just being aware of whatever the characteristic is that's hurting me, hindering me, or that I want to change, maintaining awareness of that in the moment when it arises, it's an amazing thing. It dissolves in a matter of days.
Yeah.
Provided that I can maintain, oh, look, that's here again, that kind of thing. And this whole awareness thing, and it just goes a little bit to the evidence versus faith-based. The other thing about the awareness thing is that I went and visited a friend of mine in South Carolina last year. He had a buddy with this car that I'd never seen before. And so I went out for a ride in the car. Great car. Never seen this thing before in my life. Since then, I see 2 of them a day. So the minute that something new comes into my work, suddenly I can see it everywhere,
Right.
So I'd like to hear more of what you have to say about awareness stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's the foundation of just about every type of self-improvement and growth. I mean, you have to be, really step 1 is about awareness, right? It's admitted that we were powerless and that our lives have become, you have to look at yourself and look at your life and be like, oh, I'm powerless in my life. It takes awareness. And, for some people, it's the first time that they've ever practiced that kind of awareness. But, yeah, I think it's super crucial. There was something else I was going to say. Man, my memory is shot. What is wrong with me today? Seriously, I haven't smoked pot in like 13 years, and I'm still burnt out from it. So, for me, one of the most powerful tools, one of the most powerful aspects of meditation has been, like you said, noticing something when it comes up. And when that happens, I then have a choice I can make. Whereas if I'm not meditating and I don't have that level of awareness, I don't really have a choice in this situation. So somebody cuts me off on the freeway. It's my favorite example to use. Somebody cuts me off on the freeway, and I don't realize all the thoughts and the indignation and stuff that happens internally. I just go straight to flipping them off or do what. I don't do that. It's just an example. But, if I've been meditating, someone can cut me off and I can go, whew, I can just see the anger and the self-righteousness kind of shoot up and observe it sort of from a distance, not identify with it, not let it take the proverbial driver's seat in my head. And then I can go, okay, that really, really pissed me off. What do I do now? Can I let this go? Should I just sit and watch the anger and let it kind of dissolve? Which usually it does. Our feelings tend to have a pretty short half-life if we don't keep refueling them by rethinking about them over and over again and replaying incidents. But do I act on this or not? And sometimes it's still hard to do the right thing, but it definitely gives me a buffer where making that choice is more likely. And that comes into play with the CBT approach, with practicing new behaviors. If I notice that I'm about to do something selfish, inconsiderate, I can catch myself and notice that I'm kind of in that headspace and do something different. It's been the most important thing in my recovery.
Yeah, my question is, I'm Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Could you elaborate on, you stated relaxation is separate from meditation?
Yeah, meditation is not necessarily relaxing. Meditation it's like I said, it's like going to the gym. So you're practicing a behavior, you're practicing a skill. You're practicing the skill of bringing your attention back to your breath or whatever your object of attention is. Some people use ambient sounds, some people use breathing, some people use bodily sensations, but the point is, for 5, 10, 20 minutes you're sitting, focusing on one object of awareness. And so that might be your breath. And every time your mind wanders, which could be 3 times a second, gently bring it back. You can label kind of what happens, like, thinking about dinner, or thinking about that person who looked at me sideways earlier, or thinking about whatever. And then you bring your attention back. That's hard work. And people get better at it over time, and it gets a little easier. And there often are times where we do that and feel relaxed afterwards. But it's not always the case, and I think it can just be dangerous to expect that, because if someone expects that every time they meditate they're going to be relaxed, they're going to be disappointed eventually, and they're going to be like, the meditation isn't working, because it didn't relax me this time. Relaxation is a separate thing. You don't necessarily have to be focusing your attention. You're just doing something that activates your parasympathetic nervous system and relaxes you and chills you out. Relaxes your muscles. It can be stretching, it can be walking, it can be listening to music, stuff like that. That's all great stuff, and it's important because we get so wound up and so activated that we need something to bring us down. It doesn't serve the same purpose as the practice of mindful awareness, if that makes sense.
I've discovered that in my 10th step, which I do practice on a daily basis, and I'm not a great journaler. I don't tattoo it on my forehead or anything like that. But I spend as little as a minute or less thinking at the end of my day whether I owe amends. And if things appear in my life repetitively, if for some reason that seems to go in the forefront of my mind, and I have a tendency to catch myself not repeating that behavior, and do you find that to be an effective tool? I like meditation, but I find that the 10th step actually pretty much gets me probably farther faster than the meditative process.
Sure. I would say that the 10th step is kind of like it's sort of like practicing meditation on a more thought-based level. Like you're looking at your thoughts and your actions. It's a little more of a bird's eye view sort of thing. Whereas meditation, you're getting really in touch with raw emotions and impulses, and you can still get in touch with thoughts and thought patterns and things like that. I don't know that I would say the 10th step replaces meditation. You didn't say that, but I don't know that I'd say that it does that. But I would definitely say that meditation will make you much better at doing 10 steps, because you'll have more awareness throughout the day of things that you've done that maybe you shouldn't have, or impulses that you had, or times that you acted out on emotion, and stuff like that. So, but the 10th step definitely, it requires awareness. If you're going to do your 10th step, you're going to sit down. Assuming you're doing it written, you sit down, and for a second you got to go, that's mindfulness. For a second you're kind of just looking, thinking about what happened. You're practicing awareness, you're practicing focused attention. So there's definitely an aspect of mindfulness that's part of the 10th step, but I don't think the 10th step in and of itself delivers the same benefits as meditation.
Well, when I first looked at the schedule and I saw that this was scheduled for an hour and a half, I thought, how the hell are we going to fill up an hour and a half? It seems to have flown by. Let's thank Jeff very much.